Here's something strange. Try to think of a color you've never seen. Not a new shade of blue, not a slightly different red, a color that has no relationship to anything you've already experienced. You can't. Your mind hits a wall, not because you're uncreative, but because you have nothing to remix. Every color you imagine is a reconstruction of light that already hit your retina. Now extend that same limitation to something more uncomfortable. Your opinions, your beliefs, that voice in your head you call thinking. What if most of it isn't generated? What if it's replayed? There's a common assumption people carry around, like an heirloom they never inspect. The assumption is this: I think for myself, it sounds right, it feels right. You experience thoughts arising in your mind, and since they're in your mind, you figure they must be yours. But here's where it gets slippery. Try something, pick a strong opinion you hold about politics, relationships, diet, money, success, anything. Now trace it backward. Where did it come from? Not what justifies it now. Where did you first encounter it? If you're honest, really honest, you'll almost always land on a source, a parent, a teacher, a book you read at the right age, a friend who said something during a vulnerable moment, a culture that whispered it so constantly you mistook it for instinct. The thought didn't originate in you, it was installed. And then you spent years defending it as if you wrote it yourself. This isn't an insult. It's a mechanical description of how minds actually work. Let's start with something concrete. In the early 1950s, a psychologist named Solomon Asch ran what became one of the most replicated experiments in social science. He showed groups of people a set of lines on a card. One line was clearly longer than the others, obviously longer. A child could see it, but most of the people in the room were actors, and they all confidently pointed to the wrong line. The real subject, the one person who wasn't in on it, sat there and watched everyone else choose an answer that was plainly incorrect. And in about 75% of trials, at least once, the real subject went along with the group. They pointed to the wrong line. Now here's what matters. When asked afterward, many of them didn't say they caved to pressure. They said they genuinely saw it differently. The group didn't just change their answer, it changed their perception. Their experience of reality shifted to match what they were given. Asch's work is usually taught as a lesson about conformity, but there's something deeper in it. It's not just that people go along with crowds, it's that the crowd's judgment becomes the person's judgment. Seamlessly, without a visible seam between what I was told and what I believe. The replay doesn't feel like a replay. It feels like a first-person experience. Think about how a child learns language. No one sits a 2-year-old down and explains grammar. The child absorbs patterns. Subject, verb, object. Past tense gets a D sound. Questions rise in pitch at the end. They hear thousands of sentences and begin generating new ones that follow the same rules. This is remarkable, but notice what's happening. The child isn't inventing language. They're recombining elements they received. Every sentence they construct, even the novel ones, is built from parts that were handed to them. The creativity is real, but the raw material is borrowed. Now here's the part that matters. Beliefs work the same way. You hear thousands of statements growing up, thousands of framings, thousands of emotional reactions modeled by the people around you. And you begin generating new beliefs that follow the same rules. You recombine what was given to you. The output feels original because the recombination is unique. But the elements, the axioms underneath your opinions, those were absorbed, not chosen. There's a term in cognitive science called source amnesia. It refers to the well-documented phenomenon where people remember a piece of information but forget where they learned it. You know that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but you don't remember that it came from a 1944 marketing campaign by General Foods. You just know it. It feels like common sense, like something everyone knows. And that's the trick. When you forget the source, the information upgrades itself. It stops being something someone told me and becomes something I know. And once it's something you know, you'll defend it. You'll argue for it. You'll feel genuinely irritated when someone questions it. Not because you've evaluated it, because it's been inside you long enough to feel native. This is the engine running beneath the surface of most disagreements. Two people arguing about economics or education or parenting are rarely comparing independent analyses. They're replaying different installations. One person absorbed a framework from their upbringing, their social circle, their media environment. The other person absorbed a different framework from a different environment. And each person experiences their position as thinking, as arriving at a conclusion through reason. But the conclusion was there before the reasoning started. The reasoning came after to justify what was already installed. Psychologists call this post hoc rationalization. You don't reason your way to a belief. You believe first, then build a logical scaffolding around it afterward. And the scaffolding feels like the foundation. Here's where it gets stranger. You might be listening to this and thinking, sure, that's true for other people. But I actually do question my assumptions. I'm self-aware, and that response, that very feeling of being the exception, is itself one of the most reliably replayed patterns. It's called the bias blind spot, and it's been measured. Emily Pronin at Princeton led research showing that people readily identify cognitive biases in others, but consistently fail to see the same biases in themselves. And here's the truly uncomfortable layer. The more intelligent someone is, the better they are at constructing convincing post hoc rationalizations, which means intelligence doesn't protect you from replaying. It makes you better at it. It makes the replay more sophisticated, more airtight, more invisible to yourself. So what is original thought then? Does it exist? It does, but it's far rarer than people assume, and it doesn't look the way you'd expect. Original thought isn't a new opinion. It's not a clever argument. It's the moment you catch yourself mid-replay and ask, wait, why do I actually believe this? Not why is it justifiable? Not who else agrees with me, but what is the origin of this belief in my own history? And would I choose it again if I encountered it today for the first time? That question is almost physically uncomfortable to sit with, because when you ask it honestly, you start to see the wiring. You start to see that your preference for hard work over smart work, or your assumption that forgiveness is always noble, or your conviction that vulnerability is strength. Each of these has a traceable lineage. Someone modeled it. Some experience reinforced it. Some community rewarded you for repeating it. And the repetition over time became identity. Here's an analogy that might land. Imagine you wake up one morning and find a fully furnished house. The furniture is arranged. The walls are painted. The kitchen is stocked. You didn't design any of it, but you've been living in it so long that you say, my kitchen and my living room, as if you chose every detail. Occasionally you rearrange a chair. You swap out a lamp, and you call that interior design. But the walls, the actual structure, you never touch those. You don't even see them as choices. They're just how the house is. Your belief system is that house. The walls are the deep assumptions you absorbed before you were old enough to evaluate them. The furniture, rearrangement, is what you call thinking. You don't think, you replay what you were given. Now, this could sound bleak. If everything I believe is inherited, what's the point? But that reaction misreads what's actually being said. The point isn't that you're a puppet. The point is that there's a difference between running a program and seeing that you're running a program. The moment you see it, something shifts. You don't automatically stop replaying. That's not how neural pathways work. But you create a tiny gap between the replay and your response to it. That gap is where actual thinking lives, not in the content of your thoughts, but in the relationship you have with them. Can you hold a belief at arm's length and inspect it without feeling threatened? Can you entertain an opposing idea without your nervous system reacting as if you're under attack? That capacity, that sliver of space, is what separates reflection from repetition. There's a concept in contemplative traditions across multiple cultures that maps onto this remarkably well. In some Buddhist frameworks, they distinguish between the content of consciousness and the awareness of consciousness. The content is the thoughts, the opinions, the reactions, all of which may be replayed material. But the awareness itself, the noticing, isn't part of the replay. It's the one thing that can stand outside the loop. Neuroscience hasn't fully explained this distinction, and it may be that it's more metaphor than mechanism. But functionally, it holds. The people who've genuinely changed their minds about something deep, not updated a fact, but actually restructured a core belief, almost always describe the same process. First, they noticed the belief as a belief rather than as reality. Then, and only then, could they evaluate it. Consider what this means at scale. If most people are replaying rather than thinking, then public discourse isn't a clash of ideas. It's a clash of inherited programs. Social media amplifies this by rewarding the fastest, most emotionally charged replays. The algorithm doesn't select for truth or nuance. It selects for pattern matching speed, who can replay the most triggering version of their programming in the fewest characters. And we call this debate. We call it discourse. But there's very little thinking happening in it at all. It's playback at volume. Education could be different. It mostly isn't. But it could be. Right now, most education systems install new content, more furniture for the house. Here are facts. Here are frameworks. Here are the correct answers. But very few educational environments teach you to examine the structure of your own thinking. To ask not what do I know, but how did I come to know it, and what would make me change my mind? That second question is the operational definition of intellectual honesty. And it's almost never asked, because asking it feels destabilizing. It threatens the illusion that you've been the author of your thoughts all along. There's a quiet freedom in letting go of that illusion. Not a dramatic, liberating kind of freedom. More like the relief of setting down something heavy that you didn't realize you were carrying. You don't need to defend every opinion as if it's part of your identity. You don't need to win every argument because you recognize that what you're defending might be something a 17-year-old version of you absorbed without scrutiny. You can update. You can say, I used to believe that, and I'm not sure I still do. That sentence, I'm not sure I still do, might be the most honest sentence a person can say. And almost no one says it because it requires admitting that the original belief wasn't arrived at through careful thought. It was given. Here's the thing that sits quietly at the center of all of this. You are not your thoughts. That's not a slogan. It's a structural observation. Your thoughts are patterns that were shaped by forces outside your control. Your birth order, your native language, your parents' unresolved fears, the economic conditions of your childhood, the decade you happen to be a teenager in. You didn't choose any of that. And yet, from that unchosen soil, your entire worldview grew. Recognizing this doesn't make you less of a person. It makes you more honest about what kind of person you are, and more capable of becoming a different one. You don't think you replay what you were given, but the moment you hear the replay for what it is, you're finally in a position to press pause. And in that pause, that strange, quiet, almost imperceptible pause, something like genuine thought becomes possible for the first time.